A while back, I decided to be more intentional about getting to know our neighbors. I have found that I can easily live somewhere for years and years and then move away and realize that I never knew the people who lived around me in any way beyond superficially. Life is busy and we all have our own things going on, but I often think about what I've missed by keeping to myself and not having that brief, awkward exchange with neighbors who were strangers to me that later opens the door to becoming new friendships. We live in a city apartment, and so I regularly see my neighbors and we have small talk, but usually nothing more. So I'm trying to slowly open the door to getting to know them a bit more. As I try to learn more about simplifying food and consumption, making more food at home, and buying things from local sources and people that I actually know and have a relationship with, I have also found it really useful to know the people who live around me. They're usually happy and willing bread tasters as I continue to improve sourdough recipes. They're also really great sources of knowledge to know where to buy local meat and milk, and also, which small businesses might be in need of customers right now. It's still a bit awkward because sometimes I don't really know what to say other than the sort of predictable, "How are you doing?" But I can tell that I'm moving in the right direction. So today I thought I'd make a pie for one of our older neighbors who lives alone. It has been raining here for, I think, a week solid, and I think that everyone could use a bit of a boost. Now, when I made the pie, I didn't have a ton of ingredients on hand, but luckily you can make a pie crust with only flour, butter, and salt. So I was able to make one. And I also only had frozen berries instead of fresh berries or fresh fruit to make the pie filling with. But I thought that the frozen berries would work as a pretty decent pie filling if I simmered them down with some maple syrup. I haven't made many pie crusts before, and so I'm not sure that the filling will be exactly right or that the crust is going to be perfect. But one thing I've learned as I've been trying to simplify my life, my family's lives, including our food, just bring everything back to sort of the absolute necessity and the basics, is that you really need to just experiment. You need to try things that you haven't tried before, not be afraid to mess up. Usually, especially with bready products like pie crusts or sourdough bread or muffins or banana bread, all of those sorts of things, they're hardly ever horrible if you mess up the recipe a little bit or don't have the exact right ingredients. Usually they're completely edible. So I've really let go of that fear of just getting started, and that's what I'm doing here today, because I'm sure that my neighbor, while it might not be the perfect pie, will be appreciative nonetheless, and I don't think that it can go horribly wrong with delicious berry filling and butter and flour crust. So from what I've read online, the most important thing when making a pie crust from scratch is to keep the dough cold. So when I was making this crust, I just put a cup of water into the freezer to get it really cold, and I also made sure that our butter had been in the fridge for a while. I began by adding a cup and a half of all-purpose flour and 1 teaspoon of salt to a food processor and blending that together. You can also, of course, just use a whisk to do this. Then I used a sharp knife to cube up a half cup of cold butter. I added the cubed butter to a food processor and blitzed it until the flour, salt, and butter had a grainy texture. Then I slowly added a 1/4 cup of cold water into the food processor and blitzed it until the dough just began to form. I removed the dough from the food processor and created a ball with the dough. Then I just put the dough into a covered bowl and put it in the fridge. You want to leave it in the fridge for at least 3 hours. I ended up leaving mine overnight because I just didn't have time to go back to it that same day. You can wrap the ball of dough in plastic wrap, or you can put it in a bowl and cover it with a plate like I did. If you're just prepping the dough, you can leave it in the fridge, like I said, for about 3 days, or in the freezer for 2 months. I went back to the pie crust the next day and decided that I was going to do a lattice design on top, so I reserved a bit of the pie dough for that. I rolled the dough flat and then shaped it into a circle the best I could. I knew I was going to bake my pie in my cast iron skillet, so I added the dough to the skillet and then used a fork to poke the holes in the dough. So then I made the berry filling. I combined about 3 cups of frozen fruit into a saucepan with 3 tablespoons of maple syrup and a tiny bit of water, and put that on the stove on low heat and let it simmer down until the fruit was soft. Then I added the filling into the pie base and did my best to weave a lattice on top of the filling. This pie definitely looks homemade, but I'm hopeful that it gives it a little bit of charm. I brushed the lattice with egg yolks and then sprinkled some coconut sugar on top. You don't need to bake the pie crust separately from the filling. You can just do what I did, which is add the filling into the raw pie crust and then bake everything together. But you can also bake the pie crust in advance by just not adding a filling. Then I put the skillet into a preheated oven for about 15 minutes. I had preheated the oven to about 375 Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius, and I left it in the oven for 15 minutes until the crust started to brown a bit. So here's what the pie looks like. I think it looks good. I think it looks a little homemade, but I'm hopeful that he'll enjoy it nonetheless. That's what I wanted to share today. I hope that you have some encouragement to push through those awkward conversations with strangers, because you never know the friendship that can come from getting to know the characters that are all around you in your daily life, but we just don't know quite yet. Thank you so much for stopping by today. I make 2 new videos every week sharing what I learned about simplifying food, self-care, and consumption in the modern world. Subscribe if that's of interest to you, and I'll speak to you in the next Documenting Simple Living video.